Hello, my name is Cole, and I am here to present our video on aerial bombardment and island hopping as part of Group 5. After the Marco Polo Bridge incident in July of 1937, China and Japan began large-scale military operations that would ultimately lead to the Japanese occupation of mainland China. Along with land-based military operations, the Japanese would launch multiple aerial bombardment campaigns against civilian targets in the cities of Shanghai, Nanking, and Chongqing. These raids mostly targeted civilians and were the first to do so in the Second World War. The bombing of civilians and refugees at the South Railway Station in Shanghai on August 28th garnered world attention after the publication of Bloody Saturday, a photo of a lonely injured baby in the station's rubble. While the Chinese would valiantly defend, they were ultimately defeated, due in large part to lack of training. While they were utilizing mostly biplanes and a couple of modern monoplanes, the Japanese had superior training and numbers. 2 years later, in September of 1939, Germany would also begin bombing civilian targets in multiple air raids on the Polish capital of Warsaw. These campaigns would continue through the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Overall, over 80% of the city was destroyed by the bombing campaigns, and it is estimated that over 20,000 civilians lost their lives, with most of the damage focused on the center of Warsaw. The German invasion of the Low Countries in France in 1940 would be a prelude to the Luftwaffe raids on London later that summer. After the fall of France, Hitler had set his sights on Britain and begun a large-scale Luftwaffe attack on Royal Air Force bases in an attempt to make a cross-channel landing of the British Isles a possibility. In late August, a small German bomber force dropped their payload over London in what may have been an accidental target confusion since the raid was done at night. The British retaliated with an attack on Berlin, and Hitler ordered the beginning of what would become known as the Blitz, a total shift in strategy that now targeted civilian populations and industrial targets, while leaving military targets largely undisturbed. Beginning with a large raid on September 7th, the Luftwaffe bombed London for 57 straight nights, and bombing continued on a large-scale basis until May of 1941. Compared to the Germans, the British were less prepared for an air assault. While they had plenty of anti-aircraft cannons, they mainly utilized radar and the RAF to intercept German bombers. Once the momentum of the war would shift in favor of the British and U.S. forces, they would begin their assaults on the German Reich. And in an effort to defend their more important cities, the German Reich would construct flak towers and lead towers. The British, focusing on night raids, knew that the lead towers contained radar, and in order to fool them, they would drop aluminum chaff in order to draw fire away from important targets, as visual confirmation of the target at night was highly difficult. During Operation Gomorrah, over 2,752 bombers were sortied, and due to the advantages taken by both British and American bomber crews, only 86 planes total were lost to the air defenses. While the majority of explosives used in Operation Gomorrah were high explosive, a good portion of them were also incendiary devices that would ultimately lead to some horrific damage caused from combination of the incendiary devices used and the weather. Most of the damage done by incendiary bombs was widespread, from bodies taking cover in tunnels, being asphyxiated or roasted alive, to widespread structural damage. The bombing of Hamburg was a horrific experience for civilians. So, not even the Allies were safe from the horrors of mass bombing in the Second World War. In the Pacific Theater, similar tactics were utilized by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, who had selected 16 flight crews to make the flight to Tokyo laden with over 30,000 tons of explosives, both high explosive and incendiary bombs. Their plan was to fly across Japan and land in Soviet lines after dropping off their payload, though of the 16, only one completed the flight, with the remaining 15 crash landing in China. Of the flight crew and of the 15 crashes, only 3 crewmen died. The Chinese that recovered the pilots wound up being targets of Japanese retribution, where Japan would deploy a couple of military regiments as well as Unit 731 to attack these Chinese citizens and civilians for their role in protecting and in rescuing these U.S. pilots. Under command of Admiral Nimitz, the Navy, Marines, and United States Army would make use of Nimitz's plan of island hopping in order to get close enough to Japan to stage a invasion, as well as to facilitate the aerial bombardment of the island nation in a much broader and more concentrated scale as seen in Europe. Ultimately, though, the island hopping campaign would end in Okinawa as the usage of 2 atomic bombs, both the Fat Man and Little Boy, would be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending the Japanese resistance and permitting the end of the Second World War's Pacific Theater.